Sister laughed and said, "You're still jobless?" "Figures." Dad nodded and said, "You'll never be like her." I said nothing, but when I pulled up in my new car yesterday, you should have seen their faces. I pulled up in a jet black Mercedes-AMG, windows tinted just enough to blur the disbelief on their faces as I stepped out in a suit that wasn't loud, but quietly screamed success. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The silence I brought with me that afternoon cut through years of ridicule, shame, and small, surgical insults served daily like meals. But let's rewind a bit. For most of my life, I was the invisible sibling in the family. The other one. My sister, Claire, was the golden child. She aced her way through school, got a scholarship, climbed the corporate ladder, and somewhere along the way learned how to weaponize her smile. She had this way of laughing when she insulted you, like it was all just a joke, and you were being too sensitive. "You're still jobless?" "Figures," she said last Christmas, a fork halfway to her mouth. That grin, smug, tilted, confident, like she was scoring points in a game only she knew existed. Dad nodded, didn't even blink. "You'll never be like her," he added, passing her the potatoes. That was his version of affection. Cold, exact, and always just out of reach. And me? I just sat there. No retort. No defense. Just a half smile. I've learned that words are cheap in families like mine, what they respect is evidence. And I was building mine. Quietly. Deliberately. They didn't know about the freelance contracts I'd been landing. Or the e-commerce store I ran late at night while they assumed I was sleeping in. They didn't know about the digital marketing certification I studied for in silence while they watched TV, convinced I was wasting time. They had no idea that failure wasn't permanent, it was just a season. One they assumed I'd never leave. And maybe that was my fault, in a way. I never corrected them. Never flaunted progress. I let them believe what they wanted to believe. That I was the family disappointment. The one who couldn't keep a job, who lived in Claire's shadow. But I wasn't jobless. Not anymore. I hadn't been for a while. And now, I had something better than a comeback. I had proof. The first real crack in the mask came the day Claire posted a story to her Instagram, some filtered photo of a boardroom with her shoes kicked up on the table. The caption read, "Meetings, meetings, meetings. Hashtag boss life, hashtag see you in heels." It got hundreds of likes, the usual praise in the comments. "You're killing it, girl. Teach me your ways. Inspiration." But I noticed something off. The view out the window. The chairs. Even the shape of the conference table. I'd seen that exact room before, in a co-working space downtown. One I'd used myself a few times when I first started meeting freelance clients. It was the kind of place you could rent by the hour just to look important. I didn't say anything. Not then. But it made me start paying attention differently. The stories she told at family dinners, the promotions, the deals, the awards, they didn't always line up. The timelines blurred. Her smile stayed bright, but the foundation underneath it starting to look a little thin. One night, while scrolling LinkedIn, I searched her name. Her last listed job had ended 6 months ago. No updates. No new title. Just silence. And that was when I realized. Claire's perfection was mostly projection. But Dad didn't care. He never did. All he saw was the version of her she spoon-fed him. Meanwhile, I was the punchline. The cautionary tale. Every family has one. "You know, your sister works hard. That's why she's ahead," he told me one day after Claire had left. He said it like I hadn't been working 2 jobs and still managing to teach myself how to code at night. But again, I said nothing. What was the point? They only saw what they wanted to see. So I kept building. Quietly. I moved into a small apartment, barely 400 square feet, with walls so thin I could hear the guy next door practicing his saxophone at 2 a.m. But I didn't care. It was cheap. It was mine. And every dollar I saved went back into the business. Paid for better hosting, a marketing course, better equipment. Invested in myself like no one else ever had. And it started paying off. 1 client turned into 3. A few small web design gigs turned into brand deals. And then one day, a company I'd done back-end work for asked if I could build out their entire product suite. The check they handed me made my hands shake. That night I looked at my reflection, same face, same quiet stare, but something was different. I wasn't jobless. I was just underestimated. And soon, that would be their mistake to regret. It was Easter Sunday when the confrontation finally boiled over. I hadn't planned on staying long. I brought a bottle of wine, a peace offering more than anything, and showed up wearing the same hoodie I'd worn the last 3 years running. Just to keep expectations modest. Claire was already there, of course, laughing too loudly, commanding the room like it was a stage built just for her. She wore this tailored blush pink suit, heels that clicked like punctuation with every step, and a gold watch that looked suspiciously like the one I'd seen on a resale site last month. Again I said nothing. Dinner started fine, the usual small talk, but I could feel the energy shift the moment Dad asked the question. "So," he said, spearing a piece of ham, "you doing anything with your time yet, or still sleeping in?" Claire snorted into her wineglass. "Oh, come on, Dad. Let him have his nap schedule. He's not hurting anyone." I smiled. "Just barely." "I've been busy," I said. "Busy like reading Reddit threads or busy like actual work?" she quipped, tilting her head like a curious teacher addressing a slow student. Dad chuckled. "You'll never be like Claire," he muttered. "But we've made our peace with that." That moment, that exact second, was when something in me shifted. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. They didn't want to believe I could change. Because if I had, then it would prove them wrong. And nothing scared people like them more than the mirror being held back up to them. I looked at Claire. Really looked. The foundation under her eyes was thick, cracked at the corners. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. And her laugh? Just a bit too loud. Like someone hoping if she laughed first, no one else would notice the truth. She wasn't winning. She was acting. And I realized, I didn't need their validation anymore. I'd already passed the finish line they didn't know existed. Quietly. Cleanly. But I wasn't just going to leave it there. I had a plan. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset, those days were long gone, but because the silence in my apartment felt electric. Like the moment before a storm breaks. They had no idea what I'd built. Not just a little side hustle. Not some barely paying hobby. I'd spent the last 3 years building a brand, a reputation, and a client list that could snap Claire's Instagram-fueled fantasy world in half. By day, I freelanced, web development, SEO consultations, back-end architecture. But by night, I'd started my own app. A productivity tool aimed at creatives and small business owners. It had started rough, sure. A few bugs, low engagement. But now, we had over 10,000 active users and 2 investors who were quietly interested in acquiring it. And last week, we'd made our first $100,000 in sales. Claire could keep her curated lifestyle photos and passive-aggressive TED Talk quotes. I had equity. But I didn't want to rub it in for fun. That wasn't the point. I wanted to show them what they missed. I wanted to flip the mirror and make them see the truth. So I picked a date. Mom's birthday. There'd be dinner, the whole family would be there. I knew how it would go. Claire would show up overdressed and overly loud. Dad would sit at the head of the table, wearing his smugness like a crown. And I'd show up late. Very late. And I'd arrive in silence. The kind that demands attention. I spent the week finalizing the details. I called the dealership, paid in full. No lease. No financing. I wanted no asterisk next to this moment. And when the car arrived 2 days before the dinner, I didn't post about it. Didn't text a soul. I just slid the keys into my pocket and sat in the driver's seat for 20 full minutes, staring at the steering wheel like it was a reward only I knew I'd earned. I remembered every insult. Every laugh. Every Sunday dinner I walked away from feeling less. And I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I already had it. I parked a few houses down from my parents' place, just far enough that they wouldn't hear the engine, but close enough to make my entrance count. It was early evening, sky dusky and quiet, the kind of soft lighting that made chrome gleam and windows catch fire. I waited, watching through the windshield as shadows moved behind their curtains. Claire's voice filtered out the open dining room window, loud and self-congratulatory as always. She was telling a story about her latest deal. I wondered if she still rehearsed them in the mirror first. I checked my watch. 7:12 p.m. Perfect. I stepped out, slow and deliberate, and walked the last stretch to the house with the kind of quiet confidence you can't fake. The car clicked locked behind me with a sound that sliced through the summer air like punctuation. And I knew they heard it. Right on cue, I saw Claire's silhouette freeze by the window. Her head turned. Then another figure joined hers, Dad, leaning in, squinting. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. Just walked up the front steps and knocked, even though I knew the door was already unlocked. It was my mother who opened it. She blinked. Oh. You made it. I looked past her. Am I late? Before she could answer, Claire was in the hallway, arms crossed, her eyes flicking down to my clothes. A dark charcoal blazer, pressed white shirt, clean sneakers, nothing showy. But her eyes narrowed anyway, like she was looking for cracks. Then she smirked. You Uber here? No, I said simply. Dad appeared behind her, hands in his pockets. You could have told us you were coming, he said. I figured it'd be more fun this way. Claire raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed that I hadn't bitten at her bait. Right, she said. Well, come on then. We were just talking about quarterly earnings. I followed them in, the smell of roast chicken and expensive perfume hanging heavy in the air. Dad's old clock ticked in the background. The table was already set, too many wine glasses, not enough warmth. I took my seat. No announcement. No fanfare. But the room had already shifted. They didn't know what had changed yet. But they felt it. Dinner unfolded like theater. Claire held court, of course, rattling on about some influencer campaign she was consulting on, dropping vague terms like synergy and scalability, like confetti. Dad chimed in now and then with his usual nods and grunts of approval, as if co-signing her every breath. I let them have the floor. One of the most powerful tools I'd learned in the past 3 years wasn't coding or branding, it was silence. Nothing unnerves people more than the confidence of someone who doesn't need to speak to be heard. So, Claire finally turned to me, her fork poised midair. What are you doing these days? I looked up slowly, chewed once, and swallowed. Keeping busy. She laughed. A little too loud. Still freelancing, huh? Or is it one of those between project seasons? Dad didn't look up. It's good to have hobbies, I suppose. I nodded once. Sure. It started as a hobby. There was a pause. Claire squinted. Started? I could have pulled out the numbers. Could have rattled off revenue streams or monthly users or the names of companies I'd signed. But I wasn't here to impress. I was here to reveal. It turned into something bigger, I said. A business. One I own. One that pays well enough that I don't need to ask for help anymore. Dad finally set his wine down. You don't have to prove anything to us, you know. But he was leaning forward now. Good, I said. Because I'm not. Claire let out a soft scoff. What kind of business? I locked eyes with her. The kind people underestimated. She sat back, trying to mask the unease with another sip of wine. But I saw it. The twitch in her fingers. The tightness in her jaw. They weren't used to this version of me. Not passive. Not combative. Just calm. Solid. And then I dropped the first pebble in the pond. I came in the AMG. Claire blinked. What? Dad narrowed his eyes. The Mercedes out front, I said, cutting a piece of chicken. That's mine. For a moment, no one spoke. And then, wait. You bought that? I looked at her. Not leased. Not borrowed. Paid in full. Claire's jaw worked, trying to find something clever to say. Dad shifted in his chair, looking more uncomfortable than surprised. He was doing math in his head now, trying to reconcile the son he dismissed with the man who now owned the kind of car he used to daydream about. I took another bite, slow and deliberate. Let it all settle. The sound of the fork on porcelain was louder than it had any right to be. The silence at the table was rich. Claire broke it first. Of course she did. "Well," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Congrats. I guess some people just get lucky." I tilted my head. "Luck is sleeping through alarms and still getting promoted. What I did was time." Dad cleared his throat. "What kind of business pays for a car like that?" I set down my fork and met his gaze. "One built quietly, while people were too busy judging to notice." He didn't respond, but I saw his fingers tighten slightly around the stem of his wine glass. Claire leaned in, the edge in her voice back. "Are you seriously here to rub this in our faces?" "No," I said. "I'm here because it's Mom's birthday. But if it makes you uncomfortable to sit at the table with someone you used to mock, well, that's not my fault." That landed. Her lips parted slightly like she was going to say something else, but nothing came out. And that's when I pulled out the folder. I'd brought it tucked inside my jacket. Printed pages. Not to gloat, but to show. Because they needed to see it. Not the car. Not the suit. The work. I placed the folder in front of Dad and slid it across the table. He looked at me like I'd just handed him a test he hadn't studied for. "What's this?" "Client contracts. Product license agreements. Revenue sheets. Just in case you still think I'm jobless." He didn't reach for it. But Claire did. She flipped through the first few pages and paused. I watched her face change subtly. Her pupils moved fast, scanning the signatures, the seals. My revenue last quarter. A press clipping from a startup magazine featuring a blurb about my app. The indie tool quietly changing how creators manage productivity. "Is this real?" she asked, voice thinner now. "You tell me," I replied. She said nothing. Dad finally looked up. "You never said anything." I shrugged. "Didn't think you were listening." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mom, bless her, hadn't said much all dinner. But now, she quietly picked up the folder and looked through it herself. Her eyes lingered longer than I expected. Then she looked at me, really looked, and said, "You've been working all this time." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "While you all assumed I was failing." She set the folder down gently and sat back. And for the first time in years, the room wasn't looking at me with disappointment. It was awe. And regret. Claire was quiet now. Not sulking, not pouting, calculating. That little twitch in her jaw meant gears were turning. She wasn't the type to let the spotlight shift without fighting to snatch it back. "You know," she said, voice brittle with forced lightness, "this is all very impressive, but success doesn't erase how you treated this family." I almost laughed. "Claire," I said gently, "you called me jobless for years. You laughed when I moved into a one-room studio. You told people at your engagement party I was still figuring things out, like I was a lost child." Dad raised an eyebrow. "Is that true?" she faltered. I was just joking. You know how I am." "Exactly," I said. "We all know how you are." And then I let it drop, the final turn of the screw. "I saw your resume online." She blinked. "What?" "I know you haven't had a full-time role in 6 months. The co-working space? The fake stories? It's all a show. You've been unemployed longer than I ever was. But you kept that spotlight on me, didn't you? Kept laughing so no one would look too closely at you." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. "And Dad?" He looked stunned. Like someone had pulled the curtain back and found nothing behind it. "I'm not here to gloat," I said. "But I am here to stop pretending." Claire stood up, red rising in her cheeks. "So what, you think you're better than me now?" "No," I said, rising to my feet slowly. "I think I've always been better than how you treated me. I reached into my jacket one last time and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a key fob, sleek, black, unmistakably Mercedes. I slid it across the table to Dad. "Merry early Christmas," I said. "Lease it. Sell it. Do what you want with it. I don't need to prove anything anymore." He stared at the fob, stunned. Claire stared at me like I'd just rewritten the script and left her without a line. I turned, calm and deliberate, and walked out of the dining room. Not a slam. Not a yell. Just the sound of my footsteps echoing down the hall. And behind me? Silence. I walked to the car without looking back. The air outside was cooler now, the kind of quiet that only comes when something final has happened. The AMG stood waiting like a period at the end of a long sentence, elegant, unapologetic. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door. The world hushed around me. Inside the house, I imagined them still sitting at the table. Dad probably staring at the key fob in his hand, trying to understand the gesture. Claire seething in silence, her mask slipping, wondering how the person she mocked became the man she couldn't recognize. And Mom, maybe for the first time, really seeing me. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because I had spent my whole life playing a role they cast me in, quiet, harmless, harmlessly mediocre. And now, I was done auditioning. The engine purred to life. Smooth. Effortless. Earned. As I drove off, I didn't speed. I didn't blare music. I let the silence ride with me, my oldest friend. The one who watched me grind alone, who sat beside me at my lowest, who kept me company when no one else believed. It felt good. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Just right. About 10 minutes into the drive, my phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Was that supposed to make us feel bad? I stared at it for a second, then locked the screen and dropped the phone in the passenger seat. It wasn't about making them feel anything. It was about reminding myself who I really was. People always say success is the best revenge. They're wrong. Clarity is. Because once I saw them for who they truly were, not cruel, just narrow, I stopped needing their approval. I stopped waiting to be invited to the table. I built my own. And if there's anything I'd tell someone in my shoes, it's this. Let them laugh. Let them doubt you. But keep building. The day will come when they finally look up and realize they were facing the wrong direction the entire time.